Thanks for visiting the Australian Yowie Project's YouTube channel CryptoCast. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and share our content if you like what we do. Don't forget to click the bell for notifications every time we release new videos for you. Now, it's off to the podcast. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, episode 2 of the CryptoCast presented by the Australian Yowie Project. I'm Ray Doherty, researcher and host of this podcast, where we're going to talk about all things to do with cryptozoology, paranormal, anything weird. That's us. We're up for it. But today we've got a good guest in for a chat where we're going to talk about a few things that's important to him and the work that he's been doing in relation to the Australian Yowie. And that is, of course, the very talented artist Buck Buckingham, who joins me on the line. G'day, Buck.
Hey, Ray. Thank you for having me.
No, thanks for taking the time in this isolation era that we live in to
so isolated.
To talk about all things related to Yowies and the work that you've done over the last few years, and including the work that you've done with us on the Tree Sitter program that we did over the last sort of year and a half. But what's been happening in Buck's world lately at the moment? Anything much?
Very little. I had hoped if there was going to be any type of consolation prize with shutdowns and losing work and being unemployed, because I earned my work through the arts, through working in comedy as a sound guy, running shows, and at the Queensland Conservatorium. I thought, well, maybe I'll get some time and I'll get out into the bush, which I dearly miss.
Yes.
And no, that was cancelled, and I totally understand and agree with it. This is a big thing, and it's bigger than any one individual. I thought isolated with my thoughts.
Yeah, I thought the same thing when I thought this shutdown was coming along, and you know we've all lost. I don't know anyone that hasn't lost a job, unless of course they work for the government or some other kind of professional that hasn't been affected. But I thought to myself, beauty. You know, because I've been so involved in work over the last 4 years, I haven't really had much field time at all, and I thought, fantastic. But now we're not even allowed to go to the bush, so it is what it is, my friend. I
totally understand the feeling. Yeah.
I put a post up in the Australian Yowie Project group the other day, posing a question the other week. And it was posing the question if the Yowies are wondering where we've gone now.
I guarantee it, because I was thinking exactly about it. If you're thinking about habituation, which some people practice, Yowies would know that we are creatures of habit. We walk along these paths. They're messy, they're noisy, they don't care too much for the environment. Where have they gone?
We're bad guests.
Yeah, we're bad guests, absolutely. So I'm hoping that they may get a false sense of security, and in, I don't know how long, just say 6 months when we're allowed out, we will catch them having picnics. That's what I want. Yowie picnic.
The sad thing is, on a side note of that, is that some of the Yowie sightings that have happened in very well-trafficked human areas, such as fishing holes and fishing grounds and campgrounds and day picnic areas, and the ones, because we know this has been happening, because based on the information that we've gotten, we know that some of these Yowies rely on that food that they find in picnic grounds and campgrounds to survive on a daily basis. And now that we're not doing that, they're probably wondering where the food is.
Yeah, I guess that would be maybe a concern for them. I would think that they're well adapted to finding food anywhere.
Of course.
The ibis isn't really struggling, is he? He's just gone back to what he normally does, which is perhaps, root around in the bush for food. The bins are empty. I've seen bins where there's rat droppings and rat feces and empty bins. So they'll, like everything else, if they depend on us for scraps or food, they'll find it elsewhere.
I will admit this morning, very early this morning, I was driving out at Warner and about 5 a.m. and I saw about 3 crows and 3 bin chickens absolutely destroying one of the big rubbish bins at McDonald's at Warner. They were absolutely ripping it apart, probably wondering. And I think there was a feral cat in there as well. They're all looking for scraps. And I thought this whole isolation, I'm wondering how, it's fascinating to see how it's going to play out. But anyway, we digress, and wanted to talk to you about a few things today that I think is important, particularly the work that you've been doing over the last few years. But I think there is one particular area that you've developed a real reputation for, which is your crypto art that you've been doing. And in terms of not just standardized art, but also the reconstruction work that you've done from photos and witness reports on over the last 18 months, and of course the bust of the tree sitter that you created for our talk at Nana Glen. But we can talk about, particularly the tree sitter work that you did, the Rod Benfield reconstruction and the rendering that you did for that. And of course, and I think which is one of the best reports that we've had for a long time, down at Witheren, not that long ago.
Yeah, that was fascinating. I'm lucky to be included into work like this, like yourself, which was fantastic. When we met, we hit it right off, which is great. I knew I kind of found a bit of a kindred spirit in
kind of helps
a passion for trying to get to the bottom of things. Whether you do or not, I don't know, but it's more about the journey. Witheren Truckee report was fantastic. I had got back in contact with Dean Harrison, who I've known for quite a long time, since 2005, and he's been very, very generous with his time with me, with his experience, and even things like he sent us a brand new FLIR thermal imaging camera, and we got to use it for nearly 2 years, and he'd only used it a little bit. So, that was amazing back in early 2019. Dean asked me to come along. I've known Dean for nearly 15 years, actually 15 years. I met him in 2005, and he's been very generous with his time and his experience for me, as have you. Anyway, Dean called me up and said, would I mind just tagging along so he could meet this witness by the side of a road and talk about the crossing where this truck driver had his life turned upside down when he encountered a 10-foot creature crossing the middle of the road around about 9 o'clock in the morning at Witheren, which is up in the Gold Coast hinterland. So we met him at the truck stop where he had first pulled over after his encounter, and he was smoking cigarettes at a furious rate, which he attested that's exactly what he did after the encounter. He said he could barely move his legs after the encounter, and it was all he could do to get the truck to the bottom of the hill, pull over, and just smoke for an hour.
So how long after the event to when you met him for the first time, how much time had passed?
I'm not entirely sure. I think he sat on it for a while and couldn't talk about it. It was bothering him. It
was still rocking his world pretty hard by the time you met him.
Rocked his world. Absolutely rocked his world. So the last thing he thought he was doing, he was just a working man doing his gig, driving some bluestone, I think, down, or he just dropped some bluestone from up at the monastery up there, and he was on his way back down. And suddenly this 10-foot tall creature just interrupts his world and tips it over, flips the table on his world and carries on in the bush. So he'd finally confessed to his wife, if I remember correctly, this is what was bothering him. She believed him, and then they found that they found out about AYR. He contacted Dean and sent in a report, and Dean followed that up. And then there was a face-to-face meeting. I don't always get to go to face-to-face meetings for these encounters, but this is great. And again, I'm really grateful to have had that experience, because you get to see a person reliving the encounter, where it happened, and he was straight up and down. If you put 100 people in front of him and they listen to this story, I doubt anyone would question it. His world was rocked by something that he couldn't explain, was not a man in a monkey suit, and went on to plague him for months until he finally found an outlet, thankfully. And that was telling people that would believe him, like Dean and myself. But yeah, the encounter was spectacular. He came down this hill. He was empty, so he wasn't under power. As he came around this corner, he caught a glimpse of something. What he first imagined was a big rock rolling down an embankment. And what he actually saw when he hit the brakes was this creature land on all fours, rather like a Superman character when Superman lands and
Yeah, when he when he
stands.
when he lands and he shatters
Yeah,
the concrete and
shatters the
yeah,
concrete.
I gotcha.
It stood up and he'd hit the brakes. And as he hit the brakes, the creature was also startled. So the creature was caught off guard. He wasn't under power, so he imagined that the truck, on reflection, was probably quieter. And the creature got a fright. Then it went from angry to a fright to angry and a little embarrassed. Then the creature was very close to the bonnet of his truck and just let out a yell, like a grunt, a really angry grunt, and thudded, slapped the bonnet of the truck with its hand. I don't know which hand, and it just stared at him, and it stared at a great height. The truck is about 10 foot or 9 foot four. I'll have to go over the details, but
Yeah, it was a
he
big
said that
truck
the
from memory.
creature was, yeah, looking down at him, and he said it stared at him ferociously, it hit the truck, and then stormed off the other side into the bush. And that was it. A very brief encounter. And again, we get
It
to
it,
have
sound,
this.
it sounds like a lot, but it probably would have been over in less than a minute. The whole thing.
Yeah, and the great shame of this whole thing was that he'd actually had his truck in for a service or a repair, and it has a dash cam, and it would have all been caught on dash cam. So it was in a borrowed truck on the day,
Gosh,
and it just,
that's a Homer
yeah,
Simpson dope moment right there, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, like, well, but obviously he's
slap
not
the
in.
forehead.
Yeah, obviously he's not interested. That wasn't his world. He was just, oh well, I've got to take this truck. So
Yeah, you don't think too much about it as a professional driver. You just say, oh, well, I've got to use this one today, and away we go.
yeah, absolutely. But after he saw that, he could barely get his legs working again. So he
Yeah.
drove his truck down to the bottom of the hill, and
Could you imagine what it had meant to the research if you had have got that on dashcam, though?
oh, it would have been all over Red Rover.
Yeah, either that or people then would have probably called him a hoaxer as well. You know, which is
Yeah. Well,
always the way.
that's a big problem with hoaxes, is that they do spoil it for the rest of people.
They sure do. They sure do.
Yeah.
But so when you get called out to, meeting witnesses and or talking to people that have had experiences or Yowie experiences, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
particularly in the last couple of that you've done, you sort of became a bit of a crypto police sketch artist in some way, haven't you? In trying to bring to life the images of the people's in an image form of people's descriptions.
That's right. Well, actually, after doing the tree sitter work with you, which was just fantastic, because, as you know, I spent ages poring over that image,
Yeah.
asking myself lots and lots of hard questions, and then finding all these clues that were there that then allowed me to tease detail out of your picture, which is the best blurry picture I've ever seen, but it's all there. But it needs explanation. And of course, I got very close to it because I worked with it for over a month in a dark room. I had it blown up to a meter on a wall.
Yeah.
And I'm sketching at it, and I'm looking at details that I know that should be there with, known anatomy on a face.
Yeah,
This is
anatomical features, not digital artifacts. That's the most
absolutely.
important thing.
Yeah, like the philtrum on the lip, the two nostrils, the eyeballs, the hair, the teeth. Although you and I had differing views on whether teeth or lips. My first impression, it was lips, and then I could also see teeth. So I ended up doing two versions for you because the viewer could still take one position or another. But one thing that any viewer would agree, that what came out of that was a face, a very ancient, primitive face, more human than ape-like, but still strangely more animalistic.
Yeah, more primal.
Primal. Yeah,
Yeah.
primal's a good word.
Look, I'll be honest with
So,
you, and I've said this to you before. I mean, I had that photo for a few years, as you know, but
yeah,
because we had gone to the limits of the software of the day in terms of trying to extract an image from what we saw, because as Gary, like for example, in another podcast when we spoke to Gary Opert, when we talk about using cameras, whether you're using an auto or a manual, it's very hard in terms of depth of field to be able to get things in focus correctly. You think you have it, and then of course you realize you don't, and that's the one danger with digital cameras. But when we able to use that other program, After Focus, which is what derived us the image, I mean, that changed, I said before about, witnesses having their world rocked. That rocked my world, because I think I sat on it for about 4 weeks trying to understand what I was looking at, to make sure that I was looking at what I was looking at. You know what I mean? Not like it wasn't a figment of my imagination, or having, Yowie on the brain wanting to see it so badly, which is why when I put the call out, and this is how we met, because we'd never known each other before this, right?
no, I'd seen some of your work, but I was certainly
We'd never
revolving
spoken.
around AYR. Yeah.
No, we'd never spoken or
No.
spent any time on, let alone even met. So what was most important was that I find someone who didn't know me, or know me from a bar or soap, had never worked for me before, but also someone that had good background in art, and who knew anatomical features, and preferably if they knew the subject matter, which would also help a little bit as well. And what was the big thing I said to you is that we can't have any preconceived ideas, and no input from me, really. It's got to be what you draw, what you see, or what you see coming out of that photo. But before we talk...
that's why I ended up doing two things for you: lips closed and teeth bared, which was great because you let me do that, and it also lets people know that we didn't have to agree entirely on everything, but we certainly got some very, very interesting information teased out of that whole thing, and I was grateful for that opportunity, because ultimately they led to me getting a bit fired up, and I did the bust of the tree sitter for you, and I'd got back in contact with Dean and said, hey, this is what I'm doing. And at that point, although I'd known Dean for quite some time, he didn't know that I had that skill set of art behind me. So I said, you should let me do some drawings for you. And it ended up working out, with the first one being the Witheren encounter. So I got to meet the truckie.
Let's talk a little bit about your art background, though, if we may, because as I said, that's important too. Now, aside from the work you as you said, you talk about doing events and whatnot with in comedy and working at the con. The other work that you've done over the years, in terms of your art, let's talk a little bit about that, just to give it some context so people know.
Sure.
And the film and television work as well.
All right. I come from an artistic family, not necessarily known. In fact, largely unknown. But my dad went to art school, and he encouraged me when I was very young. If I said, I'd like to do something, he gave me the choice between a crayon or a mattock digging in the hard dirt of Africa, because I was born in Africa. And he said, do you want a crayon or a shovel? And I would choose the crayon every time. So I was encouraged. I have two very, very artistic brothers. My grandmother went to art school, and my mum's a passionate free thinker. So I've been surrounded by artistic people all my life. I went to Seven Hills College of Fine Art in the very early 80s. I didn't finish it. It was very, very tough going, but I was majoring in gold and silversmithing and sculpture. So I worked very hard, but it was also kind of grueling. Looking back on it now, I know where I could have done a bit better. But that still didn't stop me doing art. So I worked at a school for many, many years as a teacher's aide, but I did lots and lots of arts and crafts, and I would everything I was doing was revolving around making something, creating something. And then that naturally led to film and TV and script writing. So I was always arts based, and then theatre management. So I'm either working 1 or 3 jobs in the arts industry just to say, yeah, I've got a job in the arts.
As you do.
Making props was a big passion of mine. Doing lots of work with silicons and resins I'm really drawn to. But moreover, I really love nature and drawing. So sketching, drawing digitally, and also just old-fashioned analog with pencil and paper.
Thanks for doing that.
That's where I'm at.
Thanks for doing that, because that provides context to all the work you've done over the last couple of years. Because, again, I mean, we've say it every opportunity we get, but I don't think a lot of people know that you have this artistic background. You have experience in film and television, prop making, sculpting. It's not something that you've just learnt.
But that's always been a double-edged sword for me. I didn't want to play that way too early on, because I felt like, if
anything, I think
it adds. Could he make a suit? And I'm going, I think I could make a suit, but I wouldn't want to make a suit. But I don't think I could make a suit that would convince people. So that's another thing. Is I've had some experiences out there in the bush where I've questioned my own observations, gone back and happily reported I was sadly mistaken. Now I could have, just blown all of that up into something that it wasn't. It's very easy to do if you don't go back and question what you've seen.
Absolutely.
But that's not what I'm about. I want some answers. I won't get all of them, that's for sure.
Thanks for listening to the Australian Yowie Project on YouTube. Don't forget to click the bell for notifications for more crypto content for your listening pleasure.